Our next speaker is a good friend of mine, Mike Kidd. I got to know Mike through coming to the Sons of Confederate Veterans meetings. Mike would come in and give programs at those meetings that were so fascinating. Duffy's talking about supply and logistics, and Mike has had a lifelong interest in the personal life of a Civil War soldier, what they had to endure, and maybe worst of all, what they had to carry. I've discussed with Mike on some of my Gettysburg tours that what I would like to do is put together a complete set of what a Confederate private would carry, which I think was around 40 pounds, counting the musket, all the bullets, their little blanket roll, bayonet, and all that. And I've mentioned that during the second day of Gettysburg, Hood's men, some of those men had to walk, Law and Robertson had to walk 27 miles that day just to get to the battlefield, and then walk 2 or 3 more miles down to the south end and go into a 4-hour assault on the Union Army, wearing 40 pounds of gear. Now, they dropped their rolls before they actually went into the battle part, but I don't know that they make men like that anymore that could go that distance, basically run a marathon that morning and go into a 4-hour battle carrying all that gear. But Mike has been very interested in the personal life, the letters and all these personal things that the soldier would use. And today he's going to talk about, I believe, the Battle of Okolona. So I'd like to ask Mike Kidd at this time to come up.
Check, check.
I'm good to go. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it very much. I appreciate y'all having me out here today. I met Claude Gentry when I was about 10 or 11 years old, right out here at Bryce's Crossroads. We were running around playing Johnny Reb and Billy Yank, but there was no Yankees, it was just us. I believe Claude had a friend named Clyde Taup. I don't know if any of y'all know Clyde Taup. I think he was with him. I believe that's who it was he introduced. But anyway, he asked us what we was doing. We was playing. They had the reenactment out there. And I said, we're out here just having a good time. He said, you boys ever heard of General Nathan Bedford Forrest? I said, no, sir, I haven't. I've heard of Robert E. Lee and Shiloh. And he began to tell us a little bit about General Forrest. And as time went on, I always remember that name, Forrest. And he told me that he was the Wizard of the Saddle, and I never really understood that when I was 11. But when I got older, I began to figure out what General Forrest did and his what he did in the Civil War. 1864 in Mississippi was a trying time. And it was also a very explosive time to live in, especially in this area. General Forrest actually met Sherman at Shiloh, and not on the kindest terms as you would think. Can y'all still hear me? To put this in perspective, the war in 1864 in Mississippi, Sherman, before Shiloh, I don't know if you guys, I'm telling you all this to fast forward you to 1864, Sherman had a nervous breakdown, and they was declared insane, and he nearly lost his command. In one of his dreams, he dreamed thousands of Confederate soldiers sneaking up on him in his dreams. I don't know if any of y'all knew that, but that was in November of 1861. And at the Battle of Shiloh, just a few months later, the Confederates had left Shiloh and they were retreating back to Corinth. So Sherman wanted to see if the Confederate troops had left. And he took some men, a couple of thousand men, and he was going out of Shiloh at a place called Fallen Timbers. I'm sure many of you know or heard of Fallen Timbers. As he got out in there, the rear guard, about 350 cavalrymen under command of a Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest, charged out of the woods and pushed the skirmishers back. Guns ablazing. Forrest finds himself up into the Union High Command right there. After the Civil War, Sherman states that had it not been for Forrest emptying his weapons, my career would have ended right then and there. That tells me that General Forrest was close to Sherman and nearly killed him. And I'm just letting you know how these people knew each other from back then. Fast forward to 1864. General Forrest had had his famous fight with Bragg at Chickamauga. And he got his own command in North Mississippi and West Tennessee, and he had to recruit cavalry. He entered Mississippi maybe with 200, 250 men, and he was declared a major general in December of 1863. He wanted to build his cavalry force to build up to fight these invasions that was soon to come. He calls to his brother, Colonel Jeffrey Forrest, with the 4th Alabama, "Come join me and join my command." The little brother of Jeffrey, and many of you know, was aged 25 years old. Just a couple of months prior to that, he had been shot in a fight with Union troops, shot through both legs upwards towards the hips. Now, I'm trying to speed this up because they're giving me 15 minutes, but I could talk all day. So he was shot through both legs up towards the hips, and he couldn't really walk, so they had to put him in a saddle. And he came to Okolona to join his brother's command in January of 1864. General Sherman, in February the 1st, leaves Meridian. He wants to do something called total war in Mississippi. This is where he branches out and learns what to do on his march to the sea later on that year. He leaves Vicksburg on February the 1st, and he's going to Meridian. So he needs a cavalry command. He calls to Sooy Smith to join him, and Sooy Smith, with the most powerful cavalry command ever assembled in 1864 Mississippi, 7,500 soldiers, along with 20 pieces of artillery. They march out of Vicksburg, Sherman does, on February the 1st. And as he's going towards Meridian, he's destroying everything in his path. Women, children, they're left without homes. The homes are being burned up, cattle shot, rounded up. It's really an awful time from Vicksburg to Meridian. All the while, he's looking back north towards Memphis for Sooy Smith. Sooy Smith is about 34 years old, and he has a medical condition. I don't know if y'all knew it. Rheumatoid arthritis. 34 years old. He suffers with this condition, and it's brought on by stress. And sometimes when the stress is so bad, it can make you sick, and you just don't even feel like doing nothing. Well, Sherman gets to Vicksburg, and he's already spoke with Smith. As Smith is entering Mississippi, he says, "On your way here, be advised, look out for Forrest." Along these words, he said that Forrest is a man you better be prepared for he fights with a vehemence for which you have never seen. And that goes back to that day at Shiloh. I think Sherman was scared to death with those guns ablazing, aimed right at him by General Nathan Bedford Forrest. I think it left a mark on him. And from that time after Shiloh, I'm fast forwarding again, he called him that devil Forrest. Y'all know the book, John Allen Wyeth, That Devil Forrest? That's what they called him. I think Sherman thought he was the devil, but he was warning Smith to be on the lookout for this Confederate general. Smith, he writes him back along these words. He says, I'll be looking for him, but I'll pitch into the foe wherever I find him. And so with that bravado, Smith is coming on into Mississippi. He is going to meet Sherman at Meridian, Mississippi. He gets down into Pontotoc, nothing's going on. He gets down to Houston, he meets state troops. They get into a little bit of a firefight. He wants to cut across to the Black Prairies. The road is mired down, it's boggy, it's narrow. He don't want to get caught in a trap. And like Wyeth says in his book, he turned his command back north for a few miles till he struck a road. This road went due east, and it marched him into the town of Okolona. And from Okolona, he turned his command south, and down into the land of Egypt he went, the rich corn grain producing section of Mississippi. He hadn't seen Forrest, but he was wanting to fight him earlier, closer to Memphis, but he was already 75 miles south of Memphis. He gets down in there, and he goes closer to West Point, and as he gets near West Point, he's pushing away everything. All of a sudden, the vanguard for General Smith strikes something in the road, and they come back in confusion on the command, run right over on top of him, and they said, "There's something up there, General. What is it?" And they look, and it's Colonel Jeffrey Forrest with his brigade, and he's standing in the road, and they're not going to be pushed over without a fight. General Forrest had already instructed his commanders not to fight, do not bring on a general engagement, lure Smith in. Smith already knows there's troops on the Tombigbee, there's troops on the Oktibbeha, there's troops on the Sakatanchi, and he's being lured in against what he just don't conceive what's going on. But the further he goes in south, before they overlap Colonel Forrest, Forrest packs up and retreats. They get him down there to West Point, and they get down in there, and Smith figures out he's in a trap. His stress starts to bother him. His rheumatoid arthritis, he gets sick. His cavalry commander, Ben Grierson, wants to take command of the army, but it didn't happen. Smith decides he wants to turn around and get out. So as he turns around to get out, he sends a diversion there at Ellis Bridge. And General Forrest, they're fighting them for a couple hours, and then they figure out Smith is retreating. Forrest lets all his commanders know, we're going to attack. We're going to fight them. And so they launch in from all four sides. Smith is going back, and they race all during the day on into the night. And the only thing that caught off the route was Confederate troops fired into General Forrest's cavalry and his staff, killing one soldier, and a bullet goes through Forrest's coat, just like what happened to Stonewall Jackson at Chancellorsville. Well, Forrest knew then they just needed to stop. We'll pick it up at daylight. This was 2 o'clock in the morning. They stopped. 4 o'clock, they get back up in the saddle and they start riding towards Okolona. They get to Okolona. Forrest has outran his whole command. He's got his escort and a little bit of a staff, and he gets up there, and what's in front of him? Union Cavalry, the 4th U.S. The 4th U.S. Cavalry and Forrest have a bone to pick with each other. Before all this happened, Sam Freeman was Forrest Artillery, Chief of Artillery. The Union soldiers in November of 1863, they had captured him, and somebody had shot him in the back of the head, and it was a member of the 4th U.S. Cavalry, and that's what was at Okolona. Well, as they get up there, Forrest is looking for his command behind him. He don't see anything. He looks over and he sees the Tennessee Brigade has showed up under Bartow. Bartow is a temporary commander for Tyree Bell's brigade, and he runs over there to them, and they have a historian in the group called J.P. Young. He was with the 7th Tennessee. He said the appearance of General Forrest ignited everybody. He had a terrible energy. He stood in his straps, and it inspired all of us. He fought more like a machine than that of a human. And he looked at them, and he said, what's those Yankees doing over there? He said, General, they're preparing a charge. He said, that's good, we'll charge them. So outnumbered, he tells his command, follow me, boys. He saw a gap in the opening, charged into Okolona. They started fighting the Union troops. The Union troops were shocked. And the reason Forrest did this, as a boy, most of you know if you've read anything on Forrest, that when he was a little boy, he was on horseback. Him and his friend was riding horses, and a pack of dogs got after Forrest and his friend and threw him from a horse. Forrest hits the ground. He turns around as a little boy, and these dogs are fixing to eat him up. Well, he turned around and just, if it's going to go this way, let's have at it. And there he went. It shook them dogs up. They couldn't believe it. They thought they was fixing to get this little boy. And it just so scared that they took tell him run. Forrest used that as a lesson. He said that when you draw your enemy, you draw them in, you turn on them, and you hit them right in the mouth. And once you hit them in the mouth, don't you let up and don't you stop. And once you get them on the run, you keep the skier on them. Well, right here at Okolona, he punched them in the mouth, and they couldn't believe it. The cavalry units began to flee, some of them outrunning the main column. Forrest chases after them. Colonel Forrest and his brigade show up. They chase after them. It turns into a running fight. About 5 or 6 miles northwest of Columbus, Colonel Jeffrey Forrest and Black Bob McCullough were in the lead. Forrest was over just a little bit to the right, a few hundred yards, and they topped a hill where the Union Army had put up a determined stand. And as they topped the hill, a withering fire struck Jeffrey Forrest. He was already wounded through both legs, couldn't walk. He was on his horse, struck him right in the throat. Out the bullet went out the back, and out he came on the ground. Colonel Black Bob McCullough throwed his hands up for the command to stop, and a bullet struck him in the hand too. And Jeffrey Forrest lay on the ground. Jeffrey Forrest was laying there, and General Forrest found out about it. He came and ran up there, jumped off his horse. He picks the boy up. I hope I didn't pop nothing. But he picks his brother up. He's weeping. And y'all, for just a moment, Morton's artillery, he recorded that both sides stopped firing, just out of respect for what was going on. They said General Forrest was weeping and wailing on top of that hill, and he was holding his brother as his brother's lifeblood fell down his coat. He lays his brother down, puts his hat over him. He turns around and gets on his horse. He asks his escort to follow him, and he tells his bugler to sound the charge. And they charge down into about 500 Yankee soldiers, outnumbered 5-6 to 1. They start fighting it out. Black Bob McCullough comes up. He looks down there, and his brigade is with him. They're shocked to see General Forrest and them being pulled off their saddles. They're outnumbered 500 to 80. And he said, "Boys, are you going to let them see them kill your general? I'll go to them if not a man follows me." And with that, the whole brigade took off down in there, and they got after Smith and routed him, saved the command. General Forrest killed 3 more men, hand-to-hand combat, and they rushed to Memphis as fast as they could go. Forrest was so tired from being in the saddle all day, they called off the fight, and then the state militia picked it up, and then they pushed Smith on into Memphis. But history records that had it not been for sundown, Smith's entire command would have been destroyed at Pontotoc. And that was a heck of a fight. But it was the first time that you could see these men that fought with General Forrest that was so impressed of him. And years later, Smith, he never did fight no more military engagements after that. Sherman didn't like him, everything that went on. And I'm going to tell you something that's amazing. Smith lost the battle to Forrest. He also lost a lot of his military command to Forrest. Smith would build bridges. He was an architect. But later on in life, Smith, who had lost his military career to Forrest, would die. They buried him in Forest Cemetery in Illinois. I mean, what are the names, to be defeated by General Forrest and to be buried in a cemetery named Forrest? It adds insult to injury. But it was the beginning of Forrest Cavalry Corps, and it really wasn't called a Cavalry Corps till later on. And he didn't have but 2,500 men, and Smith had 7,500, 5,000 his number. And as this running fight, it was really amazing, and we had learned a lot about it. We put a monument up down there where Jeffrey Forrest was killed at in October of 2019, had a good celebration. Flags marked the spot. The more I researched the battle, I'm going to read to y'all an account that I've posted it on Facebook. But a friend of mine give it to me, and I had to write it down just so y'all could hear this, if y'all don't mind me reading it. In 1929, this man was in his late 70s, and a man named E.T. Winston out of Pontotoc interviewed this gentleman and said that that we heard that you was at the Battle of Okolona. Do you want to say a few words? And this old man, he was about 7 years old when this happened, but he said he never forgot it. And I can tell I'm getting old. I got to have this right here to see it. I'm going to read to you an account that was recorded in 1929 about Okolona from a little boy. And here it is. It starts, "Those raiders were supposed to be looking for that fearless leader Forrest. When we find him, we'll string a rebel to every tree in these woods," they boasted. A few days after they passed southward, we were awakened by the strongest, most awesome sound we ever heard. It was a rattle, a roar that filled the whole earth. Well, do we remember the terror stamped on the face of my dear timid Aunt Sack? She was the only adult we saw. Rushing to the front gate, it was about sunup, and we saw through the woods on a road leading through the town on a ridge a quarter-mile west of here. Soon we heard a similar sound to the south on a road leading by our house into town. Another moment, and children as we were, we recognized the glorious banner of the Southern Confederacy, the flag that millions had learned to love. Behind it rode thousands of gray-clad veterans, men who had never known defeat, and a childish heart swelled to almost bursting when we realized that the boastful vandals had found Forrest and were vainly trying to lose him. That sound that had awakened us was a great army of the North. While plundering were Federals in full retreat, to be more exact, in ignominious flight. We then saw the knightly Forrest pass with the light of battle in his eyes. Just before reaching our home, Forrest's youthful brother, a member of his staff, was killed. The great soldier, springing from his horse, saw death stamped on the face of his loved one. Gently easing the dying youth against the trunk of a tree under which he had been placed, the mighty warrior remounted his horse. "Blow, blow, blow," he yelled to his bugler. "What shall I blow, General?" asked the bugler. "Blow the charge and keep it blowing till I tell you to leave off." General Forrest struck these invaders about a mile from our home. And let us say, those who have never heard the rattle of 20,000 muskets have no idea of the sound. Pretty neat little story, ain't it? I hope I didn't talk y'all to death. I appreciate it, guys.